Hey there, it's Sam, and I'm making this quick video to discuss the full moon that's happening in early Cancer on January 15th. The full moon will happen in Cancer around 1 degree 50 seconds of sidereal Cancer around midnight, January 15th. That's on the west coast, so it'll actually be early in the morning on the 16th, but that's the exact Purnima. I'm sorry, the exact Purnima when the sun and moon are exactly opposite each other, but we'll be experiencing that full moon day mostly on January 15th. So it's going to be happening in the Nakshatra called Punarvasu, which means return of the light, return of the goodness. And this Nakshatra is ruled by a god called Aditi, who's actually the mother of the Adityas, who are the solar deities that protect the earth. The most famous Aditya, or the one that we talk about the most, is called Savitur, and the famous mantra called the Gayatri Mantra is to Savitur. Om Bhur, Bhuvah, Svaha, Tat Savitur Varenyam, Bhargo, Devasya, Dhimahi, Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat. That's to Savitur, and Savitur is one of the Adityas, who is one of the sons or the progeny of Aditi, who is the mother, or who is the ruler of Punarvasu. So Punarvasu is the deity that rules this full moon. And so that's a very powerful Shakti, you might say, for the next 30 days or so for our mind and consciousness, because the full moon is the fully developed like consciousness or jiva within at that time. So we take that forward, and this deity impresses our mind and consciousness for the next 30 days, we would say, until the next full moon. Now this full moon is also the halfway point in the previous sun cycle. Now the previous sun cycle started with Sagittarius, but then by the time the moon came around to be full, the sun had gone into Capricorn. So it's actually, this full moon in Cancer is opposite the sun in Capricorn. And Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. It's the planet of consequences, the awareness of time unfolding, the need to be more practical and structured and not waste time, otherwise it catches up with us. And so the qualities of Saturn have to do with being determined to get the most out of what we're doing, to not be kind of frivolous and abstract, but to be very practical, to be neutral, and to assess things with a kind of cold rationale. This is how we approach Saturn. And Capricorn, which is where the sun is on this full moon, is the sign, it's the reflective, feminine, internal, psychological quality of Saturn. So it's how that cold, rational approach to life feels to us. It often doesn't feel so good. It's even opposite. It's opposite the sign of Cancer, where we're very impractical and irrational and just emotional. So again, the full moons always bring out this contrast because it's an opposition. The sun is in one sign and the moon is completely opposite. So this sun in Capricorn is bringing the intention of this rational assessment of the facts and time, whereas the full moon in Cancer is to bring sensitivity and love and intuition into that equation. So this is a kind of opposition that's going on at the time. Now a few other important things that are going on is Venus is still retrograde, and it's getting very close to an exact opposition with retrograde Jupiter. So both Jupiter and Venus are retrograde, and they're getting very close to being directly opposite each other. So for all intents and purposes, we're within a few degrees at this point. And for all intents and purposes, they're really aspecting each other at a very close orb. So this really brings into contrast that Jupiter-Venus sort of, stress, you might say. Venus is our desire to enjoy life with other people and to connect to beauty and happiness in the moment in the form of sensual enjoyment, sensual pleasure, romantic relationships, beauty, and the real kind of currency with Venus has to do with respect, appreciation, happiness, how much we're willing to pay for our happiness, how much we're willing to sacrifice and let go to another, surrender our will to another person's will in order to be happy, in order to maintain connection, in order to enjoy life. That's the Venus principle. The Jupiter principle is kind of like the heck with all of that. The heck with people and pleasure and all that. There's a bigger purpose to life. There's a higher meaning to life. And we need to connect with that. So Jupiter is the planet of spiritual pursuits in the form of like religion and higher beliefs and higher principles and teachers and philosophies and large things that give our life direction, even when all of those desires of the world fail. So this is what Jupiter is about. Jupiter, again, it's those bigger things that we're aligned with. So there's a lot of stress and pressure around these things right now because not only is Jupiter and Venus in opposition and retrograde, which means we're reflecting on both of those things right now. We're not only reflecting on them both separately, we're not only reflecting on our desires and happiness, which is Venus, and our long-term meaning and purpose, which is Jupiter, but we're reflecting on them as they pull and grind against each other because we often have to sacrifice one for the other. Like for instance, if you want to be a priest, in the Western sense, which is Jupiter, you don't get married and have sex with women, which is Venus. Or if it's a nun, the same kind of thing. So these are often, and they don't have to be, but they're often at opposite ends of the spectrum. We often turn to spirituality and turn to religion and higher purposes because of something with other people, many times relationships that fail or whatever, they really hurt us, and so we're like, okay, I need to get away from that for a while and really find a higher purpose. And then we find that higher purpose for a while, and we think, okay, now I got this figured out, and we don't really know how much we've got to figure out until we get back into another relationship again and get all those desires tested and pushed and all those buttons pushed again. So they really tend to pull against each other. So now we're not only working on each one individually as they go retrograde and we reflect on them, but they're actually pulling against each other as we work through the dynamic. And Venus itself is in Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter. So Venus is actually in Jupiter's domain. So we're probably much more biased toward the Jupiter end of the spectrum right now, which is coming down more on the realm of principles and compromising with others in order to have connection and happiness, which is Venus, seems much less fulfilling right now because if it takes us away from our higher purpose, Jupiter and Sagittarius, then it's leaving us feeling empty. And it's worth it to actually check in with our higher causes and purposes. And that includes how we're treating others. We're also looking at the big picture of our relationships and how we've been treating others in our life, not just romantic relationships, but how we treat others and the long-term picture that's been bringing and that's been showing in our life. Because the other thing that's happening with this Venus in Sagittarius especially is it's aspected by Saturn and aspected by Mars. Very directly right now. Mars is like around 24 Virgo and it's aspecting Venus directly. So we're kind of breaking things and really pressuring those connections. And Saturn is also aspecting Venus very directly. So there's a lot going on around these relationships right now. A lot of pressure and a lot of dynamic getting worked out. And so on this full moon, which comes and which perfects exactly on January 15th around midnight Pacific time, is also bringing into play a lot of these issues around long-term security and safety, which is Capricorn, and being more emotional and flowing and more intuitive about our life. So a lot going on right now. If you want to know how this affects your sign, I also do a forecast for all 12 signs, and you can check that out right now. It's part of my membership site. For only $1 you can see that. And I'll talk about how this full moon in Cancer will affect your sign. Either way, I hope you're having a good 2014 so far. Leave me some comments and let others know about this as well.